President Obama has said that we are not winning the war in Afghanistan. He has promised an additional 17,000 troops to help stabilize the country. Meanwhile, the Taliban make gains in a nuclear-powered Pakistan. The Pakistani government seems unable to stop it. Hello, and welcome to Mideast Journal, where we focus on the topics and trends that shape the Middle East. I'm Geerges. In today's program, a discussion on the war in Afghanistan and the implications of a Talibanized Pakistan. With me in the studio is David Gartenstein-Ross, the director of the Center for Terrorism Research at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. David, welcome to the program.
Good to join you.
As of this taping, the latest news is that the Taliban have inched ever closer to the capital of Pakistan. They've taken a region called Bunair. Tell us what's happening.
Well, Bunair is just south of the Swat region. Swat is shaped kind of like Italy. It goes from the top of the northwest frontier province and makes a little bit of a boot, kind of like Italy. Bunair is right below that, and then there's only one other province that's south of Bunair. So they're within striking distance of the capital of Islamabad. Now, I don't expect that to happen. I don't expect Islamabad to fall to the Taliban. But if you look at both Swat and Bunair, there's a difference in the topography in both areas. Within Swat, you have a very mountainous area. It's very favorable to defenders, very unfavorable to attackers, which makes it difficult for the Pakistani military to go in and recapture Swat from the Taliban. In Bunair, it starts to level out quite a bit. That's where you have the end of the Swat Valley. It's less mountainous, but it's still topography that is favorable to defenders, not as favorable to attackers.
But how could this happen in the first place? I mean, where was the resistance? Where was the Pakistani army?
Well, the first area was Swat, where you had a lot of fighting, a lot of contention between militants and the Pakistani military, until eventually the Pakistani military and Pakistani political leadership decided that they didn't have any choice but to enter into a peace agreement that allowed the implementation of a strict form of Sharia law within Swat. When they went into Bunair, though, the story was very different. If you look at the press reporting, you had some Lashkars that were there, basically some local tribal-based fighters, and they quickly laid down their arms once the Taliban rolled in. Essentially, they didn't want to fight against them, and there was very little done from the Pakistani military. Instead, what happened basically when the Taliban got in is, as soon as they entered, the various Lashkars and previous leadership started to draw up documents as to how Bunair was going to be governed now that the Taliban was there, basically giving them political control from the very outset. What you're getting from these areas is essentially a lot of intimidation on the part of the previous political leadership. They don't want to fight against the Taliban, which has allowed them to quickly extend the reach.
And they don't want to fight against them because they're intimidated by them or because they're aligned with them ideologically?
That's an excellent question. What I'm assuming is that there's intimidation on their part. And the reason why is, even if you're aligned with these guys ideologically, you're still going to want to maintain your own bailiwick. If you look at the various factions within that comprise the Pakistani Taliban, there has at times been there's been infighting between these various factions, and you'll still have different wings, even though they have similar strategic goals. In this case, it seems like they're intimidated, but certainly there's room for them being ideologically aligned or aligned in other means.
But part of the agreement that gave them the Swat district was that the Taliban would lay down their arms. It's, I mean, essentially appeasement. Okay, take this and then don't bother us anymore. Right. And they quickly, obviously didn't abide by that agreement.
Quite obviously. And actually, there have been, since 2005, there's been a series of accords between the Pakistani government and different Islamic militant factions, between the Pakistani government and the Taliban/Al-Qaeda factions within different parts of the country. In 2005, you had two accords over North and South Waziristan, known as the Waziristan Accords. And you had the same kind of concessions made on the part of the Taliban then. They agreed that they would lay down their arms, that they wouldn't carry out cross-border raids into Afghanistan against coalition forces, they wouldn't carry out terrorist attacks, and in return, the Pakistani government made a number of concessions, including not carrying out airstrikes, not carrying out ground strikes, disbanding its human intelligence network. But each step of the way, you got more accords in 2006 over Bajor, Mohmand, and you had a first accord over Swat in 2006. Whenever these accords have occurred, the Taliban has never abided by the accords. They've never actually laid down.
And nobody's learned their lesson from this?
Well, the part of the question is what is the Pakistani government trying to accomplish? I mean, at a very deep level, the fight against terrorism is not popular at all in Pakistan because it's seen
in Pakistan as a whole.
Well, if you're to look at the Pakistani public overall, it's not particularly popular. Now, views on it are going to range from region to region. And bear in mind, there's not good opinion polling on Pakistan. There's not reliable Gallup polls. You can't call people in some of the tribal areas. In the urban areas, there's a bit more support for the fight against terrorism as a whole. A little bit less so in the rural areas. Now, one of the operating assumptions, interestingly, of the U.S. government is that as you get closer to places where the U.S. government has carried out airstrikes, there's actually more support for the airstrikes because people living in these areas see the Taliban and religious militants as a bigger threat than they do the U.S. Now, I've seen one interesting poll come out of Pakistan, conducted by a Pakistani NGO, which supports the U.S. government's view, saying that people like airstrikes better as they're closer to it. But to me, there's some methodological problems with the survey, because it was a survey that was conducted basically, the individual conducting it talked to people that he knew. So there's a little bit of a selection bias that's going to occur within the survey. Point is that it's difficult to get public opinion polls throughout Pakistan, but from what we know, it certainly seems that the fight against religious militancy is not a popular issue. The top issue within Pakistan, as within the U.S., is the economy there. But there's a perception that the U.S.'s war on terror has brought them nothing good, that it's only brought bad things to Pakistan, and that the Pakistani government is essentially acting as a puppet to the United States. Certainly when Musharraf talked about the pressure that was brought to bear on him and the threat made by Richard Armitage to level Pakistan to the Stone Age, that's something that doesn't endear the United States to the Pakistani people. Zardari right now...
But that wasn't a real threat. I mean...
Well, this was right after 9/11. It was really said. Would we have leveled Pakistan back to the Stone Age if they didn't join us? Probably not. In fact, almost certainly not. But Pakistan was absolutely critical to deposing the Taliban regime in Afghanistan after the United States was struck. And Pakistan had helped to create the Taliban. The ISI, Pakistan's intelligence agency, provided a great deal of support to the Taliban. And actually continued to even after 9/11.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, which is how deeply entrenched is Islamic militancy in the military and in the intelligence services of Pakistan?
That's an open question and a very important question. Clearly, there's a stronger degree of support than we would like. Specific numbers, as with the Pakistani public opinion, are very difficult to get. But I'll tell you, what we know is the general trajectory of these organizations. You had, in the 1970s, a coup by Mohammed Zia al-Haq, who was, he'd been a general. It was a military coup. And he himself was, a very religious man. You could call him Islamist in that he certainly favored the implementation of political Islam. And within the military ranks, he started to Islamize the military. Very, very explicitly, people's faith would be taken into account when promotions were considered. Everyone was required to read a book on the Quranic conception of war as they advanced through the Pakistani military, and some officers who were more secular were denied promotions during this time. Then this Islamization that he tried to implement was further fleshed out on the battlefield in the 1980s, when you had the Soviet Union go into Afghanistan, and there was a resistance to the Soviet Union by both Afghan mujahideen and also foreign fighters.